Hi guys, what's up? I am Radhika. Welcome back to DataZard. Today we are going to be solving Workout Wednesday 2021 Week 46 challenge, and we will be creating a color contrast calculator, and this is the dashboard that we are going to recreate. Data for this challenge is in the form of Power Query scripts, which are already provided in the challenge from this link. So I'm going to be copying these scripts and pasting them in the Power Query editor to get the data into Power BI. So I will first copy this one, open Power BI desktop. I'll go into transform data so that we open Power Query editor. And here I will go to new sources and click on blank query so that we create a blank query. And then I will go to advanced editor and paste the query that I have copied from that website. And now I will click on done. There will be a few errors that are going to come up, and it's going to be resolved once we get all the data into Power BI. So for this one, if we go back to the data, it says it should be named color 1. So that's what I'm going to rename it. So I will call this color 1. Now let us get the second query, which is this one, and the name of the query will be color 2. So I'll again go to new sources, select blank query, and then go to advanced editor and paste that M query and click on done. And I will rename this as color 2. These queries, they reference each other, so we need to rename them as is used in the other queries, so as they are referenced. So that's why I'm going to keep them as is. Then this is the query, and its name is color convert without any spaces. So that's what I'm going to rename it as. So again, I'll go to new sources, select blank query, then select advanced editor, paste them in, click on done, and then I will call it color convert. And lastly, this is the query which is called as values. So again, go to new sources, select blank query, then select advanced editor, pasting the query and click on done, and this will be values. Now, as soon as you create all these tables with the right names, all the errors would be gone. And this is all we had to do to get the data into Power BI. I am not going to go into how these queries are created because then it's going to take more time to explain. And I want to focus more on how to use SVGs and how to get this DAX for color contrast. So I'll just click on close and apply. Once the data has been loaded, let's go to table view and look at the data. So we have R column, which is for red color, G for green color, B for blue color. So this is RGB. Then we have luminance and then hex code. In our challenge, we need the RGB for the full color. So we'll have to combine these. So there are a few measures that we need to create. And for that, I will create a new table and call it key measures. Now the first measure that I'm going to create in this one will be the RGB for color 1. So I will call this color 1 RGB, and that will be equal to, first we need to get the respective values of red, green and blue. So I'm creating variables, variable red, which will be any aggregate function. I'm choosing min this time, and get the R value for color 1. Then variable green, which will be equal to minimum of green for the color 1, and then blue, again aggregate function, and B component for color 1. Ensure that these three are for color 1, and now all we need to do is return and concatenate these values. So for concatenation, we first need the R component, which is the red one, and we are going to use ampersand for concatenation and then add a string comma. Then again ampersand, we need the green component, and then again ampersand, add a comma, and then ampersand blue. This will give us the RGB value for color 1. Let's try to bring in and see how this looks like. So it is 0, 0, 0. We need to do this for same for color 2. So I'm going to copy this and create a new measure and call this color 2. So we need R value for color 2. Then we need green value, so G value for color 2, and then B value for color 2. And rest of the things would be as is. Going back to the challenge page, if you look here, it says we need to create a DAX measure to calculate the contrast ratio. And if we click on this link, we can see what is the calculation for using a contrast ratio. And we can see that over here. So we need to get the luminance and divide the luminance of lighter color with the luminance of darker color. So I'm going to replicate this logic in our DAX measure. I'm again going to create a new measure, and I will call this contrast ratio. That will be equal to, first let us get the luminance value of color 1 and color 2. So I'm going to store them in variables called lum1, and again we have to use aggregate function and get the luminance of color 1, and similarly I'll get it for color 2. And now in the return statement, we have to use an if condition first, because we have to first check which color has a lighter luminance. So for that, I will do if luminance of first color, which is stored in our lum1 variable, is greater than luminance of the second color, which is stored in lum2, then we need to divide our luminance 1. We will add 0.05. I'm just replicating the calculation, and then I'm getting luminance 2, adding 0.05, and the alternative result would be 0. So we divide luminance 1 by luminance 2, but if this is not true, then we are going to do the opposite. So I'm just going to copy this and do it the other way around and close off the if bracket. Lastly, we need to create another measure which is going to give this advice. So I'm going to call this measure as advice, and I'm going to copy this text exactly in our switch statement that I'm going to use in the DAX statement. So let's go to the Power BI report, create a new measure. I will call this advice, and I'm going to use switch measure, and the measure is if the contrast ratio is less than 3, then the advice that we need to give is not enough contrast for text or non-text content, use only for decorative items. If the contrast ratio is greater than or equal to 3, and ensure that you use double ampersand here, and the contrast ratio is less than 4.5, then the advice that we need to give is appropriate for large text at least 18 points, bold text at least 14 point, or non-text content. And lastly, if the contrast ratio is less than is greater than or equal to 4.5, then the advice that we need to give is appropriate for any text size and any non-text content. And now I will close the switch bracket, and this is our advice measure created. Now we need to create two measures for SVGs. So for that, I'm again going to right click and click on new measure, and I will call this figure 1. Now I will use the same text that is provided in the challenge for creating the SVG, just going to amend it a little bit. So let us first get the colors. So I'm going to create a variable called color1 that will be equal to minimum of the hex color of color 1, and then create color2 variable which will be equal to minimum of the hex of color 2. Now I will do a return statement, and in this return statement I'm just going to copy the SVG text, and all I have done here is I have replaced the colors that were provided in the SVG text with the color 1 and color 2 values over here, and have just used ampersand for concatenation of these strings. I'm going to do the same thing for figure 2. So let's create a new measure, call this figure 2, and here instead of color 1, I will have background color as color 2, and then have foreground color as color 1. Lastly, we need to create measures to store this text1 and text2 value. So for that, let's go back to Power BI desktop, and I'm going to create another measure, call this text1, which will be equal to just string text1, and I'll copy this and create another measure and call this text2, which will be equal to text2. Now all our measures are created. I'm going to remove this visual, and let's first start by changing the canvas settings. So in canvas settings, I'm going to choose custom and give this a height of 900 pixels. Now I tried to Google colored tiles and I got the same image that was used in the challenge by luck. So I'm going to use that as a background. So going into canvas background, and I'm going to choose the image and click on open. Now we need to reduce the transparency to 0% and then set the fit as fit. So now I will start creating the dashboard. First, we need to get a text box which says, how should I use these colors together in my Power BI report? And let's just format this. So I'm going to give this size of 28. And then below this, we need another text saying, do the colors have sufficient color contrast to be easily readable and distinguishable? Let's just format this as size 20. And then lastly, select the hex values from color 1 and color 2. And I'll put this as size 16. Now let us create the slicers for color 1 and color 2. So I'll select this slicer and get the hex code for color 1. And we'll need to format this. So let's open the formatting pane, and in slicer setting, we're going to choose drop vertical list, and selection should be single select. And from here, let's enable the search bar so that users can search the hex number. And I'm going to choose the same hex number which is in the challenge, which is F3, F2, F1. Let's search for that, and I'll select that. I will rename this for the visual and call it color 1. Enter color 1. And in slicer header, let us increase the size to 17, and in values, I'll increase the size to 19. We'll copy this, and we have to do the same thing for color 2. So instead of color 1, I'll bring in hex code for color 2. Rename for this visual as enter color 2. And for color 2, we have 007E97. Let's find out that color and select that color. Now there were two cards here which will show the color, RGB and luminance of the colors selected from this slicer and this slicer. I'm not sure what is used in the challenge. I have figured out this using a measure. So I'm going to create a new measure for that. I will create new measure in the key measures table and call this text measure 1. Now I'm going to use the measure for formatting as well. So let me increase the size here. We want color 1. It's written like that. Then we want the color. So for that, I will concatenate this. So use ampersand and get the minimum of hex color 1. So this will be the hex code. Then again an ampersand, and we want to change the line. And to change line, we can use unical 10. and then I'll again ampersand it. Then we can just give it a space and add another line. So again using unical and giving 10, so that we have color 1 and then a gap in between, and then we have RGB and again an ampersand, and this will be our color 1 RGB, and then I'll do again unichar of 10 so that I change the line, and then again an ampersand, and then again a blank space, and then ampersand, a unichar, and then 10, and then again we have luminance, and then again an ampersand. And now we only want to show the luminance up till 4%. So I'm going to use truncate function, and in here pass the luminance of color 1, closing off all the brackets. And in truncate we want till 4 decimal places. I have not added an ampersand here, so I'm going to do that. And again an ampersand over here. It will make more sense when I bring this measure into a card visual. So let's do that. Bringing it here, and now let's just decrease the size. So in here in callout values, I'll make size 18. And now if you see, let's remove the category label. And now if you see, this is in the same format as is there in the challenge. So I've tried to replicate the same thing over here. Now we need to do this thing same for text measure 2. So the color 2. So I'm going to copy this, create another measure, and I'm just going to replace the values. So color 2, this will be color 2, 2 RGB, then again 2. And now I will just copy this visual and replace the value from here with text measure 2. So now we have this color as the hex color for both, and then we have RGB and luminance value. So now you can see I've got this measure and formatted it using unichar. Now for the last layer, let's get a table visual so that we can get the SVGs in it. And now we'll get figure 1 and figure 2 because that contains SVG data. Now this is coming as a text format because we have not changed the data category to be image URL. So let's do that. And we'll do the same thing for figure 2 as well. So this is image URL. And now you can see our SVG is being rendered properly. Let us also get our text measure text 1 and text 2 in here, and then we are going to use conditional formatting to format these. Now going into image size, I will increase the image size here to 200 cross 200 so that the SVGs, they are rendered properly. Let's give a little more space here. And now for text 1 and text 2, so let's go to cell elements and go to text 1, and for background color it will be on the basis of field value, and the field value would be the color 1 hex code, and click on OK. For its font color also, we are going to turn on conditional formatting. It will be based on field value, and this time it will be the hex code of color 2, and click on OK. So now we have in a grayish background a blue color for text 1, and let's do the same thing for text 2. So I'm going to select text 2 series, turn on conditional formatting for background, choose the field value, and this time we have to choose hex code of color 2 first because that's the background. And then for font color, turn on the conditional formatting, go to field value, and choose the hex code for color 1 because that's the text color. Now to change the headers, I'm just going to rename them. So this will be color 1 foreground. This one will be color to foreground. This one is color 1 text, and then renaming this as color 2 text. I'll just increase the size of these column headers, and now in here we need to get the contrast color, so which is the contrast ratio. And for that, let's create a new measure and call this contrast ratio text, and we're just going to format it. So it is called as contrast ratio. So this, and then we need to concatenate this with our contrast ratio measure, and then we need to add is to 1, so that whatever the contrast ratio is, that is to 1. Now I will get a card visual and get that contrast ratio text here. Let us reduce the size to 20, and in contrast ratio text, I will just use a truncate function to truncate its value to 2 decimal places. Now we don't want the category label, so I will turn that off. And lastly, we need to get the advice. So for that, I will go to advice, and in here only I will say var text equal to this, and in the return statement we can add usage and then show whatever the advice is. So get this text. And now I will just copy this and paste it here and get the advice here. So instead of contrast ratio, I'll get the advice. There is some issue over here. We can't use text, so let's just use text 1. And now this should work. Now we will need to convert this contrast ratio to a decimal value. Let's put it to two decimal places so that when we are comparing it in the switch statement, it works. I've made a small mistake here. I forgot to add true here. So let's add that, and this should fix the issue. Now let us just rearrange this and get a background behind it. So for that, I'll go to insert, get a shape, square, and I will place it behind all of this. Let's go to shape and style, turn off border. For fill color, I'll use this, and we can get 50% as background. I will keep this visual like the square selected, the rectangle selected, and go to format and send it to back. And now we can just fit all of these visuals inside it. So I've just adjusted all of these into this gray background, and this is how the final visual looks like. I hope you have enjoyed this challenge. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in my next